Hey again. Today I'm going to jump right back into my misidentification series, this time looking at the similarities and differences between Enneagram 4, the individualist, and Enneagram 7, the enthusiast. Now, I think sometimes people make the mistake of thinking that these two types are polar opposites. It is true, like all stereotypes, that there are reasons that people think that, and that there are some big differences between the two. But I really understand why people I have seen who are considering one of these types usually are considering the other one as well in their self-identification process. Now, the main reason for this is that these two types are two of our three idealistic types. And that means that they would really like things to be ideal. Now, both Enneagram 4 and Enneagram 7 can tend towards discontent, and usually that's because things are not ideal. The way they respond to this lack of perfectionism in the world, which, by the way, is why Enneagram 1 is an idealistic type 2, is different based on their motivations and their disposition. We're going to talk about some of that today and how we can discern between these types, especially if you yourself are in that conundrum in the self-typing process. Now, one of the main, probably biggest differences that we can look at right away between Enneagram 4 and Enneagram 7 is this head-heart difference. Enneagram 4 is a heart type and Enneagram 7 is a head type. We can even see this in the way that they approach life. Enneagram 4 tends to see things in the light of, I feel, therefore I am. And Enneagram 7 tends to see things through the lens of, I think, therefore I am. And really there is that marked difference between them, even in emotional energy, when you experience a person who's one of these types. Enneagram 7 on the one side has that trademark head type sort of thinky, anxiety energy. Now, all head types, 5, 6, and 7, have some form of what I would call anxiety, just caused by different things. 7's anxiety really comes from that anticipation of moving on to the next thing, finding something better, and not wanting to sit in stagnancy or boredom, and feeling this fear of, oh no, what if I'm stuck with this thing, or this is really boring and I want to move on to something else. Now, it's not always that stereotypical. I think that it's important to note that this is a thinking thing. It is an experiential thing, but it often has to do with ideas in that mental realm and the inability to sit with one for a long time. There are definitely 7s who are more on that stereotypical side, that extroverted, bubbly, social person side, but there are more introverted 7s, especially when I think about the case of like ENTP, which is called the most introverted, extroverted type in Myers-Briggs. And I think those 7s really tend to experience more that discontent or that wrestling with boredom and stagnancy in their head, in that mental gymnastics of ideas. 4, on the other hand, is really less of that mental energy. If you have a 4 with a 5 ring, they're going to have a little more mental energy, but the 5 mental energy is much more stoic, much more clipped, and much more dry than that 7 bouncy, 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 bouncy. But going back to 4, that 4 energy, because it's a heart type, and specifically for the individualist, is much more of this slower introspection. I'm gonna delve into this thought or into this feeling for a long time. 4 sometimes have this problem with getting fixated on an idea or a feeling and just sitting in it and getting really stuck in that rut. That's why sometimes we call 4s our Debbie Downers, because sometimes people are like, come on, get over it. Even if it's not a negative thought, 4s can sometimes get fixated in that feeling realm with one feeling or one idea of, and the reason for this is because they identify themselves by these things and tend to think, I feel this way, so that must be who I am. 7 doesn't have those identity issues. Their issues are more with security and feeling like they're safe. 4 has more issues of, what is my self-worth? Do I have value? So those are huge differences between heart and head types, and definitely in regards to 4 and 7. Of course, there are differences too that can be very charted and mapped out when you look at integration and disintegration on the health spectrum. 4 and 7 have very different health journeys. So 7, when they integrate, goes towards 5 and is able to dial back some of that anxiety and that heady energy that we talked about and move towards that zoomed in focus, that puzzle solving tendency that says, I'm going to sit with this and figure it out. I'm going to sit with this and see its potential. 4, on the other hand, when they integrate towards 1, they're able to come out of that place of over fixation and say, wait a minute, I need to stop just looking at myself, and I need to turn out towards the world and say, how can I use my negative experiences to actually bring joy and justice and goodness to the world and help things all be right, instead of believing that all things are wrong. So that's another indicator if you are considering this. Now, I do have to say, one tricky thing is that 4 and 7 have some similar health points. Like 1, I was just talking about, 4 goes to 1 in health, 7 goes to 1 in unhealth. But this is where I would say you really could see a red flag that would differentiate between 4 and 7, in that 7's experience with 1 is very different than what I just described for 4. When 7s go to 1, it's really from that place of discontent that we talked about, that idealistic focus gone wrong. When they want all things to be exciting all the time, and when they're not exciting, when they're not experiential all the time, 7 really disintegrates to 1 in that way that's overly black and white and overly perfectionistic and says, I won't have it unless it's exciting. I won't have it unless it's always good. And they tend to really compartmentalize and say, and play the role of judge for themselves and for others. Well, I hope that explains some of the differences between Enneagram 4 and Enneagram 7, both motivationally and experientially. If you have questions for me about this video or any other, feel free to comment or email me. I also offer individual type consultations over Skype or phone if you're interested in just getting a little bit more breakdown on your personal situation. I try to be specific in these videos, but I know that there's only so much that can be said without looking at a person's personal makeup. Even 2 7s can have very different life experience and very different ways of arriving at those 7 motivations. So far, I've gotten a lot of really good feedback on consultations, so if that's the way you want to go, feel free to email me at the email address provided at the end of this video. Thanks so much for tuning in as always, and I'll see you next time for the next Wings video.